Hello, I'm Josh Hallam, and you are listening to Just Films and That. This is the podcast where we celebrate films we think are underrated, underseen, or we just wanted to talk about them. This week's film is Spice World from 1997, so let's see what we think. Alice.
Yes, Josh.
All the colours of the world.
I don't know. Sorry, I was too late. I wasn't fast enough. I did watch the film, I promise.
Spice World.
Yes.
Spoilers, if you've not seen the film Spice World from 1997. What is it about, Alice, and why did you pick it?
So, Spice World is a musical comedy from the 90s, and the film stars the group, the Spice Girls, and follows them as they prepare for their first ever live gig at London's Royal Albert Hall. But a lot happens between the opening of the film and them getting to the gig, which their manager Clifford, played by Richard E. Grant, is trying to navigate. He's basically trying to keep them on track, keep them all safe and in one piece so they can be ready for the gig. But so much happens in between them preparing for the gig and getting to the gig.
Shenanigans.
Absolute shenanigans. It's a non-stop 90 minutes of, just tomfoolery from the Spice Girls. That's it at its essence. So the reason I picked this one is I do think it's underrated. Huge Spice Girls fan back in the day, still have a soft spot for them. I don't know how you could be, a young girl growing up in the 90s in the UK and not be obsessed with them. I was obsessed, especially with Jerry, my fellow Ginge. I don't know if she's a real Ginge, but it's fine. She was still Ginger Spice. The reason that I picked it now was that obviously recently we lost Meatloaf. And this had quite a profound effect on a lot of people. I'm not super familiar with Meatloaf's career, not super familiar with his songs. I knew he was in Rocky Horror Picture Show and I knew he was in Spice World. And it had been on my list anyway, and I was like, right, I'll do this for the Meatloaf fans and for the Spice Girls fans. We'll have a little look at his finest piece of work.
I think in a Venn diagram of fans, there's much crossover between
I was thinking
Meatloaf
this.
Girls.
We are going to bring you all together, guys.
When
this
two
is what
become
we're here
one,
for.
Meatloaf fans and Spice Girls
did
fans together at last.
At last, this is what they've been waiting for.
So I was quite excited to do this one, to be honest with you. So let's get stuck into it.
Had you seen it, Josh?
So it's one of those films I don't know. I've definitely seen bits of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've seen it before because I was having deja vu all the way through it.
Okay.
But I was really interested to watch this one because obviously the Spice Girls was such a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I think other than the Beatles, don't think many other bands, artists touch them for the level of hugeness. I don't think it can be understated what a phenomenon they were in the 90s because they were all swept up in Cool Britannia and all that, which we'll come on to. So you've rewatched the film. I've watched the film. Let's get stuck into it. What did you like about the film?
So you know what? I actually liked a heck of a lot about the film and a lot more than I thought I would. But the best thing about this film is Richard E. Grant. So his character, his performance, all of it, I just think is absolutely brilliant. So I've got a bit of a funny... a kind of a funny thing with Richard E. Grant. So I wasn't like super familiar with him like, years and years ago. I knew that he was in Spice World and I loved him there. But I was kind of indifferent to him. And then he was in Game of Thrones. And the character he played in Game of Thrones was really irritating. And the storyline that he was involved in Game of Thrones was really, really bad. So like my estimations of him went down a little bit. And then obviously he was in Star Wars, in the terrible Star Wars of which we do not speak its name. And he did that awful social media video where he was talking about how amazing it was and was basically in tears because this Star Wars film was so good, even though we know it's not. So that really annoyed me as well. So I was like, right, let's go back. Let's see what Richard E. Grant is getting up to. And I just think he's brilliant in this. He's got great comic timing. He's got some great facial expressions. He's just got a great performance. So he plays Clifford, who's the Spice Girls manager. So he is the best thing about it for me. Other than that, the whole package, the whole thing, it's just fun, it's wacky, it sometimes dives into the absurd. It looks absolutely brilliant. The props, the costume, it's all bright colours and it's all a bit out there. They sort of drive around on this bus, on their tour bus, even though they're not really touring. It's just kind of where they use to sort of house themselves, isn't it?
They seem to be living on a bus.
They live on the bus, I guess.
Like the Teletubbies, not the Teletubbies, who am I thinking of? Like a children's TV character, like...
Yeah.
living in
Who
one
lives
place,
on the
don't
bus?
they?
Yeah, yeah. But they're in this bus like for a lot of the film, and the interior design of the bus is brilliant. And there's lots of like different props and like different costume choices and that to highlight the different girls and their different kind of personalities and interests, or what the public believe their personalities and
Yeah.
interests to be, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
they do say like they don't want to be seen as stereotypes. You know, Sporty
Yeah.
Spice is like, do I have to
Based
be
on
on an
their-
exercise
yeah.
bike all the time? And all
Based on
this?
their nickname sort of thing, isn't it?
Exactly. There's a brilliant photo shoot sequence. I don't know if you remember this, where they're sort of doing promo photos for the gig and stuff, and they're all dressing up in all different kinds
As
of
each
outfits.
other,
and they've
they're all
got
dressing up as
fabulous
each
hair,
other.
dress up as each other,
Yeah,
which I just think is
yeah.
brilliant. Then my favourite is when Mel C dresses up as Danny and Emma Bunton dresses up as Sandy
Oh, yeah,
from
Grease.
Grease. They look amazing. So just so much effort gone into the way it looks, into the hair, into the costume. It's all brilliant. It does also seem to, it takes the piss out of itself, I think. I think one of the reasons that maybe it didn't do so well and that I do think it's underrated, people gave it a bit of a hard time, was because in terms of films and, you know, movie-going experiences, it's not amazing and it's not flawless. But I don't think it's trying to be. And it
No, so
does
it's-
take the piss out of itself.
So it's one of the things I meant to mention earlier when I was talking about how I'd seen it before. One of the things I knew about it was that it's famously it was panned by the critics.
Yeah.
I knew it got a tough time when it came out, which we'll come on to later on. But you know, you are right. It's quite meta. It's quite self-referential, and I think personally for me, it's got its tongue well in its cheek.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, you've got a moment where they're rehearsing, aren't they, for the gig? And they're rehearsing with Jules Holland. Oh my God. We'll get on to the cast and the cameos shortly. So Jules Holland is there and they do like a rendition of one of their songs or whatever. And he says something like, "Great girls, that was brilliant," without actually being any good and stuff like that. And there's like a post-credit sequence where Richard E. Grant is on the phone to someone, maybe his agent or someone, talking about doing the film. And he's like, "Oh, am I really going to do this? This is career suicide," and stuff like this. So I feel like it knows what it is and it almost knows how people are going to perceive it. I think it's quite funny in places. I think you get some moments of humour from the girls themselves, but a lot of the comedy comes from the people around them and the situations that are happening around them. You've got so many different like threads of narrative and action going on, haven't you? You've got the documentary crew that are following them around, trying to create this documentary, you know, about the Spice Girls and about girl power and all this. You've got some studio execs who are trying to pitch a film about the Spice Girls and everything that they're going through. You've got these like horrible, slimy vultures at the newspaper who are trying to bring them down and tear them apart and, you know, take stuff that they've said out of context and take incriminating photos of them and all this. And there's just a lot of this going on. Like there's lots of different things happening.
A lot of threads in there, isn't there?
There is, yeah. And some of it's told, you get some bits told kind of through flashback and you get some like dream-like sequences, these like, you know, interpretations of things that may or may not happen. Like one of their friends is having a baby. So then they imagine themselves as mums and you get to sort of see that play out and stuff. I think there's a lot to like in there, Josh, I'll be honest. What about you? What are some of the things that you feel were positive about the film?
It's difficult to talk about because it's such a moment in time around the Spice Girls as a cultural phenomenon and all that. So I think I want to talk about it as two separate things. As a film and as a product around a wider context and subject matter. So in terms of what did I like about the film, well, the songs are iconic. You know, I've got a lot of nostalgia for that time. It was quite nice to be reminded of Cool Britannia and girl power and all that time, you know, because we both were, like 7 or 8 when this came out. So it was, I do remember it coming out. I do remember the Spice Girls. I do remember what a huge deal it was at the time. Like I said before, I like the fact it's quite meta. I think its tongue's in its cheek. I think the cameos are good. I mean, you've got everyone in there from Elton John through to Jennifer Saunders, Michael Barrymore. There's loads of them.
Well,
I'm sure you've got
Roger Moore, Elvis
Roger
Costello,
Moore,
Jules Holland, Bob Geldof, Jason Fleming, Stephen
Laurie,
Fry, like Hugh Laurie. Like it goes on and on and on. Every other face in this was someone.
You got Barry Humphries playing the most the most poorly disguised dig at Rupert Murdoch I've ever seen in a film
Oh, I know,
before.
yeah. Brilliant, though, but brilliant. And I think sort of touches like that do elevate it a little bit and show that it's a little bit more intelligent than perhaps it seems on surface level.
So there's two ways I'm looking at this, and I'm quite conflicted. But on one hand, if you look at it, it is a product. It is the Spice Girls as a capitalist product, and they're just pushing that. But on the other hand, if you look at it, actually, it's quite a good parody in a way. I can't make up my mind on it. So I think you've got some really good daft jokes in there, like about, there's things about every time the American guys pitch a story to their manager, Richard E. Grant, you see a cutaway of what it'll look like as a film. I think that's quite funny. Some of the stuff you've said there, where they're all on their phones at the end credits and they're breaking the fourth wall and they're not playing their characters, they're the actors. So it's not just Richard E. Grant. All of them are talking. Like Alan Cummins is obviously Scottish, isn't he? And he plays an English character. And he's like, oh, they want me to drop my Scottish accent and all that. It's good to see like celebrities send themselves up and stuff like that. And there's some really daft jokes in there that I found funny about, like, is there a joke about Jennifer Saunders and she's at a party and she's talking about manta rays?
Yeah. So
and she thinks it's a brand and they're talking about the fish.
Or thinks it's a clothing line, because Victoria goes to it. She's like, "What do you think about manta rays?" And then Jennifer Saunders is like, "Oh yes, love manta ray. These shoes are manta ray. This jacket's manta ray, and all this."
Yeah, that's it. So there's some really good jokes in there, and ultimately, I think another thing I want to draw attention to is it's not for me. This is this is written at a moment in time where the Spice Girls are the biggest thing on the planet. It's written for Spice Girls fans.
I mean, it was for me. Yeah, I cannot tell you how much I loved this film when I was a kid. Yeah.
And I'm not a Spice Girls fan. I fondly remember them, but it was ultimately girl power, and it was such a fan. I think it was such a. I think it can't be understated how impactful and important it probably was at the time, along with the wider context of Cool Britannia and New Labour and all that. And I'm sure the people got many different opinions of lots of different things at the time. But the Spice Girls are something that I think most people, especially of our age, maybe a little bit older as well, remember really fondly. And this definitely captures a certain moment in time, which is chock full of nostalgia.
Oh yeah, definitely. Completely agree. And for me as well, I can't, like you said there, obviously about it being, it's a capitalist vessel to sell the Spice Girls, to sell them, their image, their songs or whatever. But because of how old I was when I see it, I obviously didn't absorb it that way.
No.
So then when I was watching it this time around, I didn't really absorb it that way again. I just saw it as like this fun, exciting, colourful, just, it's almost like, it's so chaotic in a way that it's like fan fiction. Someone's like, and then the Spice Girls did this, and then they met some aliens, and then they were in a film and all this.
And we'll come on to this, but I read some of the critical reception, not the scores, but I read some of the reviews because I knew it was already poorly reviewed. I thought, I wonder what they did say. And a couple of them, I felt like sort of going, you've missed the point. You've taken it too seriously, and you've taken it maybe too literally. Like I saw one of them was I think it was Roger Ebert, and I normally agree a lot with Roger. I mean, I know he's passed away now, but any of his reviews I've seen in the past, I normally agree with them. But one of them, he said something along the lines of, because it's the most comparable thing to this film before this would have been A Hard Day's Night. Which is obviously the Beatles film, or other Beatles films like Help, or maybe some of the films. Well, I would say some of the films with Elvis in, but he's one guy versus a band, so I think it's different, isn't it? So let's take A Hard Day's Night as something that was inevitably going to be compared to at the time. And he said something like, "Well, the Beatles were all incredibly talented musicians, and let's face it, these 5 women could be interchangeable." And I thought, that's not reviewing the film. You just don't like the Spice Girls.
Yeah.
Get your head out your arse a little bit and look at the film as a film. But I think if you're looking at a film, you've got to contextualize it. If we've done plenty of films that are for kids, like All Dogs Go to Heaven or whatever, you can't go in as a 20-something, 30-something, whatever person and be like, well, this, because you've got to try and look at it within the context of what it's intended for. You could take something like a Marvel film and say, well, it's just formulaic because they're all the same. Yeah, they are, but they mean so much to the people who like them, and that is what's important. So I think it's important to acknowledge, you can point things out about a film that you like and don't like, but I think it's important to acknowledge you might not be the intended audience, and that is just okay.
Well, and I think that's what makes us different kinds of film critics. Like,
Yeah.
just because we don't think something is highbrow or we didn't enjoy something,
Yeah.
or you can see that maybe, the script is lacking or there's no story depth or whatever. But you take, yeah, that's exactly what you said. You take it as if you were the intended audience. Like when we watched like The Great Dictator or some of the classic films, you put yourself, or you try and sort of take yourself back in time and be like, imagine being someone at the cinema watching this film at that time. And that's where the power comes from.
Absolutely.
Because if you were to compare it to films that were made today, obviously it's shit. Obviously it looks rubbish and the continuity is bad and the sound is bad. Obviously it is, because of look where we are in terms of film industry and the technology that we have. So yeah, no, I think it's a very cynical way to look at films, and that's not what we're about here, is it, Josh?
It's not.
The funniest moment in this film for me, and something that just really, really stands out, is towards the end when Richard E. Grant's character, Sir Clifford, isn't sure if the girls are going to turn up for the gig, right, for their first ever live show at the Royal Albert Hall. So instead, to sort of appease the audience or whatever, so he's backstage and the documentary film crew are filming him, he goes, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go out onto the stage and hang myself. And he's holding a noose in his hand. And I was like, whoa, what the hell? It just took a bit of a turn there. But oh my God, it's just so funny. And he just plays it so straight. And oh gosh,
It is
I
funny.
just thought that was a brilliant moment.
You've got a lot of actors in this just chewing the absolute shit out the scenery and looking like they're having quite a good time doing it.
Yeah, I think
It's
so.
like it's
I
got
think so.
panto vibes.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Everything's big, everything's theatrical, everyone overreacts to everything. But instead of it being annoying, I just loved it, I had such a great time.
Let's move on to talk about things that we might change about this film. This is going to be tricky for you, I know, because you've got a lot of childhood affection for this film. But is there anything?
So, I mean, ultimately, no, there isn't anything that I would change about this film. There are a few things that I'll bring up now in terms of dislikes or things that maybe could have been handled a bit differently. So it is chaotic. Like, we jump from one thing to the next.
Like narratively.
We've got, it's just a bit all over the place. Like, we've got a pregnant best friend, and then we've got two kids that have won a competition, and then we've got aliens, and then they go and do a gig in Spain, and then they go to dance camp. And like, it's so chaotic that everything does stay at a superficial level. Yeah. And if that doesn't bother you, great. This is the film for you. Have a great time. But if you're looking for something deep and meaningful, this ain't it.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
It's narratively all over the place, isn't it? And
it is, yeah.
And it's almost, it reminded me of like, when Comic Relief does a sketch and they weave it in and out of the story.
Yeah, so like, and it's like, who can we get? Let's get this famous person. It reminded me of that.
Or it reminded me of like, did you ever watch SMTV Live?
Oh, did I watch SMTV Live?
The greatest kids TV. Yeah, but it reminded me of like when they would do that, but they would do it throughout the course of the whole program. They just keep going like, let's see what's going on back at the Spice Girls house or whatever. Totally. That's what it reminded me of, but in a film. So I can understand why you might look at this and go, what? The alien bit. I was like, am I having an out-of-body experience?
Yeah. So my sort of in-depth, analysis of that is that to try and show that they are so famous that they extend, beyond the galaxy, that sort of thing. That's what I read into that. But then also it was kind of like, because Richard E. Grant thinks that maybe they're just a bit exhausted. So then maybe it was like a bit of a fever dream as well, like a shared mania. Oh, and just in case you haven't seen the film, is the Pope a Catholic is something that Jerry says in the film. And that is really something that I would say. But obviously, I had to say it at that time because, comedy.
What else?
So if you don't like the Spice Girls, you ain't going to like this, I don't think.
It's a tough sell, innit?
Yeah.
If you don't like the Spice Girls.
Yeah. So if you're isolating a huge chunk of the audience there. And I think that maybe that would maybe make it a little bit underseen as well. Because not only if you're not a fan of the Spice Girls, but maybe if you weren't a fan back then. I know that they still do the odd thing now. Like I think they still went on tour and that, but I don't think they're gaining any new fans, or I wouldn't have thought they are.
No, it's all nostalgia, isn't it? It's similar with other bands that are like that. You still see bands from the 80s still touring. like Tears for Fears or the Human League, and you think that are they getting new fans, or are people of the certain age going, I just want to see the Human League because I want to hear the hits or whatever. And I think it's like that. It's similar, I suppose, with like Take That or other bands like that. So I know what you mean. Although it's funny you say that because it was quite a hit, wasn't it? Like financially, I think it did quite well in terms of like relatively speaking.
Yeah, when it was released, yeah. And the final thing, but again, this didn't really bother me that much, is the Spice Girls can't act.
Yeah.
And, they are the main characters, but, they can't act.
Yeah.
So it just, again, it adds to the quite superficial feeling of the whole thing, I think. But you know what? Apart from that, I really I just loved it, I had such a good time watching it. I enjoyed it so much more than I thought I would. It was funnier than I thought it would. And it was actually in places a lot more intelligent than I think I gave it credit for. What about you? Are you gonna shit all over me, Josh?
No, not necessarily. No. So I agree with a lot of what you said there. A lot of that echoes what I've got in my notes as well. It's narratively, it's a mess. So even things like in terms of exposition, their friend who's pregnant shows up and it doesn't even say who she is. And I know
what is that about? It's such a weird vessel for a narrative, isn't it? It's so weird.
But there is what I do like about it is there is an emotional payoff at the end. So she obviously has the baby, and there's this whole thing of, well, now that is girl power. Having a baby. And I like that. I thought that was a really nice emotional beat. But at first, I was like, who's this? Is this their friend? Is it someone they know? Is it someone who works for them? Who is it? And I know, show don't tell, but I could have done with a little bit of like something to just explain who she is to then I think that would have increased the emotional payoff at the end as well. But yeah, so narratively it is all over the place. You got, like you say, it's almost like a sketch. It's a series of comic relief style sketches. So there probably needs to be more of an actual story to take you through a little bit there. Like you're saying, okay, they can't act, they're not very good at acting. They're not completely awful, but there are bits just like you just go and you're not an actor. Like it's quite and they're not. Yeah. I suppose being cynical does, and this is the other side of the coin, is it ultimately they are a product and this is there to make money? And is it a case of, are they too wrapped up in the Spice Girls brand and making them look good that they didn't bother to actually put in place a story? Are they selling their audience short a little bit by going, we know you're going to pay to come and see it, so it doesn't freaking matter what we put in the film. So there is a cynicism in me that says there might be a little element to that in it, but you got to weigh it up against the actual wider context. And that's what I'm saying. So for me, ultimately, it's flawed in its execution. The main issues being the narrative structure and the actual script is quite hammy. It's quite cheesy. But I think the important question for me is this: would I, watching this as a young girl, feel empowered? Would it want to make me be would it make me want to be a Spice Girl? And I think you can ignore the cynicism around this being a product-based, money-making, machine to push the Spice Girls brand and think, actually, there's a lot. And I think it's important to note this. There is a lot of bullshit around what young girls and teenage girls like. And I think we are predetermined to laugh at that and say what they like is rubbish. And if you look at what teenage boys like, it isn't the same. It doesn't get the same treatment in the public eye, in the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it. People do. If young boys like, supposed to like football and that's cool, and they're supposed to like other sport and that's cool, and they might like action films and that's cool. Whereas
race cars and Formula One.
And whereas what young girls like, I still think, and it is better than it was certainly in the 90s, but there is still predispositions of everything you like is shit. It's like, oh, you like One Direction. I know this is an outdated reference, but One Direction, oh, they're rubbish. Well, actually, you're making that assumption because around stereotype, really. And I think it's important to notice that for me, at the end, they come out on stage and they sing Spice Up Your Life. And I think it's quite a good moment. It's a good curtain call ending, which I really like. And I think it's really important to note that they do a good job in this of showing female characters being friends, being strong, being empowered, being together. You know, there's a bit where Richard E. Grant, and he's flustered all the way through the film, and he comes rushing in and he says something like, the papers are saying this, and one of them just goes, I don't care what the papers are saying. And I think I think it's quite important to note that in the film. I think it's quite important to note that there is a good message in there. So yes, the script feels like it feels like a mixture between comic relief and panto, and it's a bit rubbish in places, and it's a bit all over the place. But ultimately, I think it's doing what it's trying to do. And I know I've said I'm trying to look at it on, one hand I'm cynical, one hand I appreciate the message, but actually you can't have one without the other. So if by creating something that makes money, you can also help young women feel empowered, is that a decent payoff? I'd say it probably is, yeah.
And like you're saying, if there's nothing like that sort of since the the Beatles was the first thing, and then it's like, right, so we've had the men doing it, and they had however many films and like TV things, like there was so much focus on them for decades and decades, and then finally in 1997 the girls got a taste of that as well.
Yeah, exactly, and that's important. It is important. Okay, so let's move on to having a little look at the critical reception. It's going to be interesting, I think. Now, I've already alluded to the fact that I know it didn't do very well, but I've managed to avoid the scores. So, it's difficult.
Throw a guess at me, Josh.
Difficult. I'm going to say it's low. It's like 4 out of 10 or something like that, maybe. Yeah, no, Joff, I'm going to say 4 out of 10. Could be lower.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, Josh, but you're pretty, like, if you're going to average it out, you're pretty much bang on, let's be honest. So on IMDb at the time of recording, it got 3.6. And over on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience gave it 45%. And then the critics gave it 36%. So exactly the same on IMDb and the critics on Rotten Tomatoes. Some of the reviews I saw weren't too mean, and it was a bit, pointing out issues, like you said, in the plot, in the script, but that overall, if you like the Spice Girls, then you will enjoy this.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of people, and especially for a lot of people critiquing film or who enjoy cinema as a medium of enjoying entertainment, just it having the Spice Girls in it probably isn't enough. So I do believe that's underrated. I think the 45% is sort of adequate. I would obviously give it a little bit more just because I did love the film as a kid and I still enjoy it now. This isn't one that I saw as a kid. Now I'm rewatching and going, oh, actually, this is rubbish. What was I thinking? I'm so glad I've matured. Like, I still really enjoyed it. I still thought it was great. And I think it's a little bit underseen as well. I don't know about you, Josh, but I found this really difficult to get hold of when I was trying to watch it.
I wonder if many people are checking it out now.
Well, I don't think so. It makes me think, A, that maybe the people who made it want to forget that it ever existed, which I think is very sad. I can't remember what the B was. It makes me think that, doesn't matter. I can't remember what the B was. Maybe it was Mel B. Hey! But that also, I did read somewhere online as well that someone was looking to buy it. They wanted to buy it on DVD. And they could only find it somewhere for like $60. And this was in America as well.
Hard to get hold
and they
of.
Couldn't find it anywhere else. So I think that's a little bit odd. Where is it? Why isn't it everywhere? Tell me, someone.
I think you're right. I mean, for me, I'm going to say it's underrated because I understand the flaws with it as a film, right? And I understand the whole thing of if you don't like the Spice Girls, you're not going to enjoy it. But if you don't like the Spice Girls, you're not going to watch it.
No, and I think, you're not the intended audience. You're not the desired audience.
It's very much a product.
Yeah, but I don't even think it would have been made to get people into the Spice Girls.
No, it's not.
It literally feels like it's for people who already love the Spice Girls to love them even more.
Yeah, it's the same
right?
It's the same as A Hard Day's Night. It's the same as the Justin Bieber one that Popstar takes the mick out of. It is for those fans. It's for a specific
What is it with me and the musical comedies?
It's for the fans of that specific artist. It's not, you're not scrolling through streaming services and you might see films that are, other films we've done and go, oh, what's that about? Oh, stick that on. Let's watch that. You might look at, in the heart of the sea and look at the cast and look at the story and go, oh yeah, that sounds good. Put that on. If you don't like the Spice Girls, you're going straight past Spice World, the same way you would go past the Paw Patrol movie, or the same way you would go past a film that it is not for you. It is not a broad appeal. It is a narrow appeal. And that's the whole point. So I think, for the reasons I've said, it is underrated because there is no way of almost rating it, because unless you can go, I'm a Spice Girls fan and this is my issue with it. So that it's underrated. I think it's underrated. And I agree, it's underseen as well.
Yes.
Viva forever.
I'll be waiting, everlasting, like the sun. Well, there we go. I didn't see that coming, listeners, but Spice World is underrated and underseen. Thank you very much, Josh.
Enjoyed.
Yes, and enjoyed. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you're going to top that, quite frankly, Josh, but tell us, what are we going to be watching next week?
Next week, a little bit of a different flavour. We are going to be watching and talking about a film called Equilibrium.
Okay.
And I will say no more about it.
Oh, rightio. There we go. Equilibrium next week,
yes,
listeners.
Indeed. So, yes, join us next week when we're going to be talking about Equilibrium. In the meantime, if you'd like to get in touch with us, it's filmsandthatpod@gmail.com. We're on all the social medias if you just search for Just Films and That Pod. And you'll find us. We're also on your telly box, aren't we, Alice?
We are indeed. So every Friday from 6 p.m. on the local TV network, you can find us in Birmingham, Bristol, the North East, Liverpool or Leeds. That's on Channel 7 on Freeview. Or if you live in North Wales or South Wales, you can find us on Channel 8 on Freeview. We're also on Channel 195 on Sky. That's every Friday from 6 p.m. on your local TV channel. You just can't get enough of us.
So yes, join us next week. We're going to be talking about Equilibrium. Until then, thank you very much for joining me, Alice Oliver, as ever.
Oh, it was a pleasure, Josh, and thank you.
It's goodbye from me. Cheerio.
Bye.